This podcast is kindly sponsored by Ellucian Student, powered by Banner. Ellucian Student is the modern AI-powered software-as-a-service solution, purpose-built for higher education, empowering your institution to seamlessly connect people, processes, and applications. By choosing Ellucian, you choose a winning combination of global and regional expertise. I'm Susanna Marsden, a higher education consultant who helps to develop and support HE institutions in the UK and beyond. This podcast takes a deep dive into the roles of people who work in this hugely varied higher education sector. Each episode reveals what's involved in a specific role, the career path that led to it, and tips on how to get in and get on in these jobs. My guest in this episode is freelance higher education consultant Hugh Jones. Hugh is a renowned figure in higher education, having worked in several universities during his career and, since 2014, undertaken consultancy work with over 60 clients. He is also the founder of the Higher Education postcard series on Wonkhe and deputy chair of the Board of Governors at Birmingham City University. He was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Association of Higher Education Professionals in 2022 for making a positive difference to UK higher education. In this episode, Hugh delves into his career background, the type of consultancy work he undertakes, and what it's like to engage as a consultant. He also reflects more broadly on the higher education landscape, including the strategic opportunities for higher education institutions, as well as how governance needs to change into the future. He additionally offers some top tips for careers in higher education professional services and also shares what motivates him to continue working in the sector. Hugh, welcome to the podcast and thanks for being my guest in this 50th episode. You set up Hugh Jones Consulting in 2014 with the aim of providing specialised support to strengthen governance, management and strategic direction of higher education institutions. And since that time, you work with numerous organisations and people across the sector. Can you say a bit more about the range of consultancy work that you do?
For sure, Susanna, and thank you very much for having me as a guest. It's great to be here and congratulations on 50 episodes. That's a really impressive thing you've done. I think consultancy is a funny kind of thing. And the starting point, to my mind, is always, why do organizations need consultancy? Sometimes it might be about a straightforward lack of capacity. They need a pair of hands that can do something. They don't have enough time. Off you go. Sometimes it is about specific expertise. We need someone who knows how to write a set of regulations. We need someone who knows how to wrangle the OFS. And sometimes it's about the perspective that you can bring from outside an organization and the organizational problems when you're living them can feel absolutely overwhelming. When you look from the outside, well, other people's problems are often easier to solve than one's own. So my career, I was always a generalist. Started off in student admin and kind of went through to try my best to run universities. And that's really the same as my consultancy. I've done all sorts of things, looking at organizational reviews, policies, quality assurance work, coaching, mentoring, strategy support, facilitation of workshops, business case writing, bid writing, governance reviews, regulations writing. It's a wide variety of things like that. And essentially, if a university's got a problem, I'm happy to talk about whether I can be the one to solve it.
And you mentioned a bit there about your career. I mean, you have a notable career trajectory in the HE sector, starting at the University of London in 1990, and then through a series of increasingly senior roles within several universities. Step us through that career path. And I'm also really interested to know to what extent your institutional career journey was planned. It's a question I ask a lot of people on the podcast. Or was there a point at which it started to get a bit more planned?
That is a very good question, because it's like any sort of history, isn't it? You look back and you try to find a pattern. But when you start out from it, you're just getting on with stuff and making it up as you go along. And so, as you say, you looked at, you know my LinkedIn, we know each other well, but I started at University of London in 1990. Entertainingly, people like this one. I moved to higher education administration because it was a substantial pay rise from my first job, which was paying almost literally peanuts. Senate House was great, did lots of things there, junior committee clerk, looking after exam irregularities and PhD appeals, and taking the first steps on academic policy. I wrote my first academic regulation at Senate House. But after a while, got a bit frustrated. It gave me a chance to do an MA, the MA in Higher and Professional Education from the Institute of Education, which is now part of UCL. And I think that was really important. I think that was the time I thought I could make a career of this. And also it gave me a breadth and a way of thinking about things, which perhaps I hadn't had before. But this was also back in the day when we used to have the clerical and academic related grades for professional service staff. And at Senate House, I was a clerical member of staff. And you can get stuck on that one, not do anything at all. So the move to City, which was next, and now City St George's, that gave me a chance to move into an academic related role. Brilliant place to work. I learned lots, supporting committees, quality assurance, the senior management team, having helped the new vice chancellor facilitate new strategy development. I got to try line managing people and also learned an awful lot. I mean, a shout out here to Francis Owen, one of the best bosses I've ever had, who I learned an awful lot from. I moved in 2004 to St George's as academic registrar. So basically, there was an internal promotion going at City. I didn't get it, so I got another job. But being academic registrar at St George's was fantastic. I mean, lovely people, great team, a small institution. And that's a very good thing, I think, to teach a lot of things. It means you've got to work on everything. You've only got one person deep on most of the things you're running. So you need to make things happen. You need to learn how to get teamwork working really well. You also need to learn how to keep things very, very simple and how to really prioritize effectively. And it was a fun place to be. Medical schools are not for the faint-hearted, and it was good fun doing it. If I move on, and I did indeed move on, the next stop was Goldsmiths as registrar and secretary. That wasn't planned particularly. I'd always thought the academic registrar was the best job to have in university because you got to do all sorts of fun things. You didn't have to worry about resources or big policies or external world, things like that. And then I got a chance to be registrar and secretary, which was head of the whole administration, college secretary, basically everything non-academic. And it was fabulous doing that. You have to, again, learn how to lead teams where you don't know the detail of how things are done. I could do everything in the registry. I was expert enough to do that. But put me in charge of the teams that do IT and library and marketing and HR and finance. And that's a whole different level of how to motivate people, how to help people solve problems, how to get the best out of teams, how to encourage team working. So learned an awful lot. It was a challenging place. So 2010-11, when the new fee regime was being brought into place, I think we had 4 occupations in 1 year, which taught me a great deal about negotiations and how to solve things, how to solve problems. When I left Goldsmith, I think it was in better shape than when I started it. I was trying to create a single administration with one head, and that was good fun. But the move then came to Cardiff, where I was Chief Operating Officer, or Prif Swyddog Gweithredol, if you want to say it yn Cymraeg. I do not speak Welsh, by the way. Anyone who speaks Welsh will know from that pronunciation. Cardiff was a much larger institution, very different culture to London institutions I'd worked in, and a lot of things to sort out. We'd moved there. I mean, we had an ambition to leave London, and the ideal place was going to be a large northern city on the Welsh coast, and there aren't any. We counted twice, but Cardiff was not a bad estimate on that one. Did lots of things there, introduced college structure, looked at how to get the professional services working together, but it didn't work out. So in 2014, I moved on to set up a consultancy.
I'm interested to know, just reflecting on what you've been saying there, at one point in your career, I think it was at City, you were talking about supporting the senior leadership team. And then within your career, you became a senior leader within several institutions. To what extent do you think that experience of supporting a senior team encouraged you to want to take your own leadership path?
I think the chance to work closely with a senior team, and what happened was that, having supported new Vice Chancellor at City, David Rind, very good leader, I thought, and he got together a group which he asked me to facilitate to develop a new strategic plan for the university. On the strength of that, I was asked to support SMT as the secretary to the group for the next 2 or 3 years. And I think that gave me a sense of the breadth of things that came across people's desks, but also an insight into how top teams can work, and indeed how they can't work together, which was really interesting to see the different dynamics of play, but to recognize that you don't need to be the expert financier to have a valid opinion on financial strategy. You don't need to be an estates person to actually know, really, is that a good idea on estates or not? And I think that was, it did show that it could be good, fun and rewarding to go beyond the kind of student academic focused work, which was certainly removed a barrier, even if it didn't necessarily push me in that direction.
You mentioned that you left Cardiff and you set up your work as sole practitioner consultant now for 12 years. And that sole working, I mean, it's in stark contrast to the significant sized teams you were part of and led through the earlier part of your career when you worked in universities. And, you know, all of us will have experienced those times working in an institution where you just wish that you had that bit of time on your own to work through a particular challenge. And you now get that space in your consultancy work. But equally, a leader is normally only as good as their team. And many people, and I know you, enjoy being part of a community of people. So I'm interested to know, when you started your consultancy, how did you navigate that shift from being part of a team to sole working? And how does that compare to what your approach is now several years on?
I like that question. And I want to broaden it. I will answer it, but I want to broaden it as well, because I think, yes, there's a big part of team, but let me start somewhere else. When you are leading a large team, you're responsible for an awful lot of things over which, in practical terms, you have no day-to-day control. And when I was at Cardiff, when I was registrar at Goldsmiths, I would occasionally find myself lying awake at night worrying about halls of residence. What happens if? What happens if? And of course, there's nothing you can do. You've got a good team, you trust them, they do it. And I think one thing about the move into consultancy was suddenly finding that unambiguously, everything I do is my choice, and every mistake I make, I can fix. And indeed, I have to fix. And that was a huge plus. And I think that's part of what you then offset against the other parts of it. So thinking about the question of how do you get company? And I learned very quickly what I think I probably knew anyway, which is that I'm really motivated and really energized by working closely with other people. And it's not just being in the room with them and talking to them, but it's being around them, just having that buzz of conversation. And yes, that is a big miss. And I think it meant that when I was on a consulting project and prior to COVID, that normally meant get on a train, go somewhere, spend a day meeting people. You really learn to value those interactions. And there are probably about half a dozen people I've met and worked with in short bursts over a consulting project who I think have turned into proper friends, which is great because you can still make friends in that environment and make it work. But it does mean you have to absolutely extract the maximum dose for when you're doing something. So, if you get the chance not to be locked in a small room, go and sit in a cafe, go and people watch, be in a meeting, just see what's going on there. I think also it means that you look at other ways to do it. And one of the ways of doing it is to think about the online world. When I started my consulting, and I'd wanted to be a consultant, I wanted to try it out a long time before it actually happened. I realized at the time that I'd written a business plan, but I didn't know enough people. I didn't have enough reputation. It wasn't going to fly at all. But what I realized was that marketing was critical. And marketing doesn't mean put an advert in the Times Hire saying, hey, Hugh's great, hire Hugh. That really isn't going to get you anything at all. To my mind, marketing and higher education and the kind of consulting work, it's more about making sure people know your name and recognize your name. So it's, what are you there for? And initially I set up a blog, called it Sweeping Leaves, the notion being that leadership was a bit like sweeping leaves on a windy day. It is a never-ending task. You never finish, but you've got to keep doing it. And that gave me a platform to write about topics in HE, whether it's management, whether it's leadership, whether it's policy, whether it's particular news stories at the time. It got a little bit of an audience, and people did say occasionally, oh, I follow your blog. I know about that. I know you from that. And that was great. But also it's where I learned that actually you can use social media not just for mucking about, but you can use it as part of taking part in the discourse, the conversations around HE. And so that's part of how you can make a community too, outside of physically being an HE. I decided very early on that interim work wasn't my thing at all. At interim, you either do two things. You're either holding a fort or you're sacking people. And neither is really my forte. But at interim, you do at least get to be part of a community for a short, intense burst of time. So it is dead important that you find this way to do it. Post-COVID, there's a lot less traveling. I'm not on the road as much as I used to be. People welcome, I think, the chance to meet online more. And that, to my mind, increases even more the importance of looking at social media as a way to make contacts, but also engaging professionally. So one thing which has been a big part of my freelancing work has been being active within what was then the Association of University Administrators, or AUA, and is now the Association of Higher Educational Professionals, or AHEP. And through AHEP, I mean, I acted as program lead on the PG Cert that AUA/AHEP ran with Nottingham Trent University for years. And that meant that every few weeks you get to be in Zoom in front of a whole bunch of students and learners who are people from different institutions. They ask you hard questions. They're lively, they're engaging. It's brilliant fun. Keeps you going, keep me sane anyway, or as sane as I can get. It's a challenging thing. And I think that there's definitely, you have to be comfortable with your own company and your own judgment. But there are absolutely ways you can find community and work with that, which is very important.
And you're known in the sector, not only for your consultancy, but also being the founder and writer of the HE postcard articles on Wonkhe. To what extent did your postcards play a part in creating that new community for you?
Oh, I think they did, in no question, play a part in that. For those listeners who don't know about it, I started sharing on the app formerly known as Twitter back in post-COVID days, postcards of universities. I'd come across them in an antique shop. I bought half a dozen or so, shared them. People liked them, so I thought, this is okay. I'll do some more of that. And I've done about 1,300 postcards, and it's become a problem. But what I did was share one every day on Twitter. And after a year or so, the good folk at Wonkhe agreed that I could write a weekly blog for them, which was, share a postcard, write a bit about what's on the postcard. And these are all with university or things related to it. So it's become a way to narrate, I suppose, my view of higher education and what it's about. I think there's something really important about knowing where universities have come from and why they come from there. I think the sense of purpose and value is important for anyone who's trying to make meaning of higher education now. And I think the reminders about where universities started from, the history, the reasons, but also some of the downs as well as the ups of universities has been a good thing. And I think that has encouraged a lot of people to follow me now on Blue Sky, not Twitter, but also, post on LinkedIn when I do a blog and people like it there. And you get interesting comments on them too. So I think it is a good thing. Cynically, and it wasn't done for cynical reasons, it does mean that people, again, know me. I ran out of steam writing the blog. It's years since I last wrote a Sweeping Leaves blog post, but people now know, oh, yes, you do the postcards. I like those. Or can you do X? Have you done Y? And that's really good fun because it engages people, and it's a chance to explore more, tell the stories, and contribute a little bit to the positive side of the sector rather than the doom and gloom, which is mostly pervasive.
And this might be the 50th episode of Job Showing HE, but you've had 200, is it? 200 postcards on the Wonkhe site?
So the 200th episode is coming up on the 13th of February. It's nice to have done so many. There are plenty of stories still to tell, so I'm not going to stop at any time soon, unless the people at Wonkhe say, Hugh, enough already. And, that might happen any day. You never know.
You have a really successful career as an HE consultant, and you've worked with over 60 clients on over 100 projects to date. But the term consultancy or consultant, it can have a challenging reputation, can't it, across all sectors, with classic lines like a consultant being the person who borrows your watch to tell you the time. How have you navigated that sort of cynical backdrop in relation to the real value that you can bring an institution or client?
I think that's a valid point, and there is a reasonable cynicism about some consultancy. I think the way to do this in ways that don't put people's back up, and that's really what it's about, is to, first of all, you really have to understand the problem that the client wants to solve. And it's often not the one that they present to you. They come with what they think is the problem, but actually the process is, firstly, actually understand what the exam question is and then answer the question. And that process of understanding the question is critical. Where things haven't worked out well for me is where I've not spent enough time really understanding what the problem is and what's trying to be solved. And, you learn and you make those mistakes and you try and not do it again if you can avoid it. Once you start talking to people in the organization who, typically speaking, are subordinate to lower down hierarchically than the person who set the project going, or they work in a different team, they all know that the problem isn't the one that the big cheese thinks is the problem. And that process of demonstrating that you understand that you've already got there yourself, that can help grow credibility quickly. There's also an important part, which is thinking about whether I can make a difference. Sometimes there's other people are better placed because of their expertise, their style, their personality, previous work they've done in this area. And if that's the case, I will happily point somebody else in the direction of the client. I think it's most important to do things that really, I honestly think I'm the right person for the job. But if I'm not doing that, why am I doing it? I think it's quite important. You've got to visibly demonstrate value. If every conversation you're having leaves your interlocutor thinking that they've been heard, they've been understood, and that there's some hope that the problem might be solved, that goes an awful long way to growing the trust in someone who comes in and does things to an organization, sometimes does things to people in a way which they may not have a huge amount to say over. So it is a very difficult line to balance. So we look at individually how we make a difference. And so for I'm not the person you'd hire for financial analysis. I'm not the person you'd hire for project management. They really are not my strengths. But I'm told that I can listen and understand very well, and people open up to me remarkably quickly, scarily quickly sometimes. I'm being told things which I think, gosh, that wasn't an expectation the first 5 minutes of this meeting, but there we go. So if there's problems which involve understanding complexity, unpicking knotty problems, helping people work their way through things, that's right up my street. And if you focus on what you're good at, where you know you can add value, I think that's one of the ways where you avoid falling into the just an expensive consultant lark. One thing which I am pleased about, you go through now 12 years in this freelance job, but the stats you said earlier on, 60 institutions, 100 projects, there is repeat business there. There's universities that have used me on a project and they've come back to me sometimes a year or two later on. And I think that's quite reassuring. I didn't do it so badly that they wouldn't treat with me again. And that's a good sign that it's not always just about dipping into someone's pocket while you tell them the time on their watch.
I think one of the things that's really interesting that you've picked out there is about listening to people and listening to the particular issues that are going on, which basically means it's not some sort of boilerplate solution that you're trying to bring into an institution. It's actually about it being tailored to the specific problem, to the particular issues that they want to solve.
I think that's right. And I do think there is a place for standard methodology to apply to things. I think there are ways to deal with problems around transformation. There's ways to deal with programs of change where standard methodologies can be absolutely fantastic. And there's some brilliant people out there to lead on those things. And that's great. But I've never yet done a project where listening carefully doesn't tell me some really important things about the broader context, the culture, the values, and to my mind, yes, solve the problem, but also try and help the client understand, why did this happen? Can you stop it happening again? What are the things which make people leave early? What are the things that mean that team's unhappy? How can you approach those in ways which are doable and achievable as well? I think that's quite an important bit. But yes, what I think I try and bring is a lived experience and expertise at making mistakes and solving problems, and therefore knowing how to navigate through what are really unusual cultures sometimes and very interesting power dynamics and communication channels and expectations of value and all sorts of things that underlie the myriad different roles in universities and academic organisations.
And to what extent has the consultancy support that clients are seeking, to what extent has that changed since you set up in 2014? I mean, for example, at that point, the Office for Students wasn't with us.
I don't think universities will ever run out of problems to be solved. They are fundamentally unmanageable, ungovernable organisations with an awful lot of people who do different things and want to have different aims. And you'll always find communication problems, bad management, organisational design that gets in the way of people doing the good thing. So that's good. That doesn't change, and that keeps happening there. The OFS has created a work stream supporting institutions applying for registration. At the moment, in the past few years, there's been quite a few clients in this space. I mean, I'm based in Swansea in Wales region, doesn't have the OFS, but an awful lot of clients come from England and where that's a need. And often what they will need is either the extra pair of hands or particularly the insight into how the OFS works, what works there. And the OFS doesn't make the process easy for institutions either, which makes it challenging. If it was only about supporting new OFS registrations, I don't think I'd keep doing it for very long, because that can be quite challenging and quite difficult as you keep encountering the same issues there. And so the other thing to realise is that times are getting harder. Universities don't have discretionary money in the way that they used to have discretionary money. If they're going to solve a problem, they really need to think about why they're bringing external help, and you need to make sure it counts. So that changes the nature of things, which means that the times are more interesting, more challenging. But I think also it means that as a consultant, I'm learning more with each project and able to demonstrate more to future clients about how I can change things and how I can help them do better what they're trying to do.
Being self-employed does bring a large amount of unpredictability. I mean, there's no guarantee of work. Working patterns can vary. You've just talked there about how work has changed across the last 12 years or so. But when work does come along, you may be approached to take on a piece of work that may not be quite right for you. You talked about that a few moments ago, to do with particular skills, or sometimes where you just don't have the capacity. Where do you draw the boundaries about what you take on and what you might politely decline?
My rule here is listen to my gut. If in the process of the talking about the problem, and always on consulting, you don't leap straight into saying, here's a figure, let's get on with it. I find the best project, I might have 4 or 5 long conversations with a client, hour, 2 hours, before you even get to saying, right, here's a proposal, here's what it will cost, here's how we'll do it. Because that helps the client understand what I can bring to it, but also helps me understand what's really going on here. And sometimes that process makes you realize that there is something fishy about it, whether it is you're not being told something really important, whether it is something about the broader culture of the organization being toxic, whether it's about the individual you're working with, where you think, I don't trust them, I don't want to work with them. And I think that, so my gut tells me not to do it. I have learned not to do it. A couple of times I've ignored my gut and I've regretted it. I think also it's about sticking to your values. Education, to my mind, is about making society better. If there's a client that doesn't really seem focused on that, but is more interested in the money, I'm not sure that's the client for me to work with.
Looking at higher education in its broadest sense, we're clearly in a time of big change as part of instability within the country as well as within the world more broadly. But from that position, there can also be opportunity. And we talked at the start of the episode about one of the aims of your consultancy being to support the strategic direction of UK higher education institutions. What would you say are the opportunities that need to be grasped at this time?
That's a difficult one. And we also need to, let's acknowledge up front, opportunities can sometimes be used euphemistically. It's a great opportunity for change. No, we're going to cut. We're going to take away some of the value. We're going to make things less good. And I think it's important we acknowledge that, because you can easily be glib and say, oh, brilliant. It's not a challenge. It's an opportunity. It's not a weakness. It's a potential strength. No, it's not. It's a weakness. So I think it's important to get that. But that said, there are some things I think the institution can do which would genuinely help get us to a place where purpose and value are more important. So one approach I think will be important for HE is to remember our roots. Most UK universities and colleges were founded to serve specific towns and cities, specific populations, specific trades. And I think since the rapid growth of HE from the 80s onwards and the more marketized approach that's been in place since fees in 98, but actually really with the impetus since 2012, I think there's been a homogenization of universities and colleges, and maybe we've forgotten the purposes we may originally have had and the closeness to the towns that we are based in. And I think working out what that means in 2026 and how can universities work in partnership with local government, with businesses, with the NHS, with agencies in towns, that might lead to some solutions to current problems. And it's maybe about trying to go back and say, we were established to create, I mean, think about the former polytechnics that started off as mechanics institutes. That was originally intended to be out providing education for working class men who weren't able to access formal education beyond the age of 14 or 12, to give them technical skills necessary. And fast forward to 26, the world has changed in terms of what happens in schools and the universality of education. Great. So what is the role of a local higher education institution in supporting the industries in the town they're in? What's the role in supporting the communities that they work in? How can we provide programs that make sense to them? And it doesn't mean forgetting about what we are now, but it does mean about trying to say, if we were starting from scratch, how would we do it? So it's not about stopping being a university, because a solution to university problems that means actually we'll lose so many staff and pare down so much teaching that it ceases to be meaningfully higher education. That really isn't helping us. But is there a way to think, is there something about co-delivery of courses, sandwich courses? How do they get reintroduced? Apprenticeships or models that? Maybe. Is there something about directly working with particular firms and businesses on particular courses that can support it? Delivery in the workplace, more use of the staff of other organizations as co-deliverers. Maybe those are ways that could make sense and will enable us to get through where we are and still be standing in 5 or 10 years' time when maybe society's worked out it quite likes higher education again.
Governing bodies are clearly responsible for the strategic direction of a higher education institution and is a core part, therefore, of seeing through opportunities of the type that you've just been talking about. You have vast and varied experience of the governance setting. You spent a significant proportion of your early career managing boards as registrar and secretary. Since 2020, you've been a member of the Board of Governors at Birmingham City University, and I know you've been deputy chair there too for the past couple of years. And in your consultancy work, you've undertaken many governance reviews. In its broadest sense, what would you say needs to change in HE governance? And how best do you think those changes could be enabled?
Governance is one of those words like strategy, which can seem awfully big and full of complexity. And good governance, to my mind, it's really simple: making good decisions properly. So it's understanding the context, it's not being biased in particular decisions, using the right data, involving the right people, and making choices that lead to a better future for the institution. Simple to say, very hard to do. And I think at the moment, before I start with two fairly big criticisms of how things work, I think it's worth saying that universities are actually pretty well governed in lots of ways. There's a lot of people give their time for free. Most universities do not pay their governors. So people are giving up time. And, BCU, I think it's probably 20 days a year, 25 days a year I'm doing on things for BCU, which is a decent chunk of time. People aren't doing it because there's an extrinsic reward to it. They're doing it for the intrinsic value of higher education and wanting places to succeed, wanting universities to be the best they can do, and giving back to a sector which has done an awful lot for an awful lot of people. That said, I do think there are two big problems at the moment. I won't say challenges, I'll say problems. I think one is that the systems of university governance grew up when universities were operating in a more stable environment and where they had a lot of civic society backing what they did. So they're great for business as usual. They're not very good at overseeing change in, I think, what can reasonably be called crisis situations. And a lot of universities are in crisis now, even though they're trying their best not to say they are. And, there's challenge to the values and the purposes and the funding and the support for it, and lots of things not working right. So the current system, everything is funneled. You get the Board of Governors oversees it all. They delegate an awful lot of day-to-day stuff to the Vice-Chancellor, who then delegates outwards. And this one source of power, I mean, that could be too concentrated. It's a very heavy burden for any individual to carry, and it doesn't give you many options when things don't go right. I mean, basically, governing bodies have two states of mind when it comes to the Vice-Chancellor. One of them is we have full confidence in them and everything they do, and the other is they have to go. And there is no halfway house. You can't have a situation where a governing body is not sure, but given a bit of time, you either are or aren't happy because you're responsible for it all. Now, that is not a big set of options for helping an executive work through a situation. So a way in which you could perhaps broaden out the control there, or find ways for governors to be not involved in the management. I think there's a really important part about governors can't mark their own homework. If they're holding the executive to account, the executives have to have the people to make their own mistakes and make their own successes. But there are ways in which you can think about a greater engagement. And, there's more meetings. I've known some university governing bodies meet monthly. Others are meeting 3 or 4 times a year. There's obviously a huge difference in that in terms of the engagement you get and how it works there. There are different models and they could be explored there. Something I would be really interested in seeing is whether a model which is much more like a company model could work. And I don't mean by that profit making. I mean a situation where there are more non-execs than execs on the board. but there are also more than one non-exec on the board, where the board, the non-execs, appoint more than just the vice chancellor, but they appoint two or three others, maybe the finance, maybe the marketing, maybe the deputy, whatever it might be. But that way you then create a smaller board where there's more immediate checks and balances, but it's very hard then to sort of maintain this distinction, accountability, etc. But it's something to be explored, I think. The second point, I think, is now criticism, is how are governors held accountable? If we go back to 19th century, when a lot of universities and governors were established, as well as the council or the board of trustees, whatever it might be, there was a court. There was a wider group, which was representatives of civic society, representatives of students and staff, representatives of the place you're in, industries, and they once a year would hold the governors accountable. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? What happened to this? Now, that model doesn't work today. Where courts still exist, they are ceremonial. It's a nice excuse to show off and have a cup of tea, but really it's not doing much at all. But I do think there's a need to find something which in 2026 terms fulfills a useful function of governors being accountable for what they do. I've no answer to that one, but I do know it's a problem.
People are central to the work you've undertaken across your career, and notably your support of professional services colleagues' professional development. You talked earlier about AUA/AHEP and the work that you've done there, but you've done much broader work than that in supporting many people's careers in the higher education world. What would be your top tips now for encouraging people to consider a higher education career or to continue the development within the sector if they're with us already?
I like that question, and I think it is important that the more senior you get, the more experience you get, the more you share that knowledge and experience with others who are early in their careers than you are. I know that I myself benefited an awful lot from being able to listen into senior colleagues' conversations at an early stage in my career by being brought into meetings and projects and given a chance to have a go at new things. And I think you have to continue that, otherwise the chain of being doesn't work. For people not in HE who didn't even know that higher education professional services were a career option, I'd say it is a good sector. You get a chance to work with interesting people, you get a chance to solve interesting problems, and it can be very, very rewarding. I think if people are junior in their careers, early in their careers, and want to think about how to develop, I think I'd give two tips, I think. One is try to experience different types of role. And so that might be in the centre if you're currently in an academic department or a faculty, or vice versa. If you're in the centre, try and work in a faculty, because you learn so much about the different dynamics of the different parts of a university or college and how the rhythms of the day, of the week, of the year are determined on the one hand by the physicality of students. You know, if you've got 100 students banging on the door at 9 on Tuesday morning because they don't know what room they're in, you have to deal with that. And it's a really important discipline. Equally, being aware of the hard and unforgiving deadlines sometimes from regulators and funders, and knowing that you've got to do this by Sunday, you've got to deliver these things like that. That's also a different kind of rhythm. And I think knowing both sides of that coin can be really, really important. Similarly, student-facing policy work or all policy work, that's a good dichotomy to have. Keep learning. Keep learning is really important. I mean, formal qualifications will be increasingly essential. Alison Wolfe, Professor of Public Policy or Economics or something like that at King's, wrote about this a long time ago. And you can look at it simply. If you've got, as was the case when I did my degree, about 1 in 7 people went to university, then if you've got a university degree, there's a fighting chance that you are going to be standing out in the marketplace, and that people are going to say, well, this actually, we do need a graduate, on you come, do this job, as it goes there. As the number of people with degrees increases, then you get a situation where an employer who needs to hire a reasonably senior job at one that doesn't actually use graduate skills, well, they can say you've got to have a degree, because they know full well that automatically their shortlist is down by half. They don't need to have 100 applications, they can look at 50. And if you're recruiting someone, 50 applications is much better than 100, because 100 is too many to really do the deal with. So how do you stand out? How do people really differentiate? And increasingly, I think, postgraduate qualification. Getting a master's mattered to me. Now there are 2 or 3 PhD programs aimed at university management, university professional services work. And I think increasingly that will become a pattern in the UK. It already is in America, where a doctorate in university administration is part of the career path if you want to get senior. But also think about skills. Think about the things that you might need to brush up on that don't need a formal course. There's so much you can find via follow an interesting speaker on YouTube. Look at LinkedIn Learning. Look, is there an online free course where you could quickly learn how to do pivot tables in Excel, about how to do a better presentation? And all those things will make a difference, because the more you can do to that, the more effective you can be in your job, the more you'll have time to do things well, the more you'll be noticed, the more things will open up for you in terms of opportunities. So I think those things are always good. And keeping learning keeps your brain going. And learning to keep reading stuff. And I mean in this sense, reading. I think I differentiate that rather than trying to pick stuff up there, because I think reading gives you time to think. It makes you follow a thread, whether it's a story, you're reading fiction, whether it's a line of argument because you're reading a non-fiction book, a how-to book or a history book, whatever it might be. It's good for your brain. And it also, and particularly reading fiction, it gives you different perspectives. It helps you sit in somebody else's shoes. And that ability to see the world through somebody else's perspective makes such a difference, I think, in a successful career, because you begin to have the imagination to work out, why am I not getting through to this person? Well, how do they see the world? You're a bit part character in their world. What's going on in their head that they can't hear you, or they won't see you, they won't engage with you? So I think that sense of keep your imagination live and active really matters, I think, to developing yourself in a career.
And in relation to that point, Hugh, about seeing things from different perspectives, and particularly for professional services colleagues, working with academics, is that an important part, would you say?
Hugely so. I think there's a really valuable set of outcomes that can come where an academic or team of academics expert in a subject work alongside people who've got skills in organising and delivering, in project planning, in IT, whatever it might be, to make something a reality. And I've been lucky enough to be in a few situations in the different units I've worked in where that working together generally creates a synergy. It creates a situation where, 2 + 2 can equal 5 because you're making something better than it would otherwise have been. And that may be that the academic staff can see an outcome that you're not seeing that helps you grow your scope, grow your ambition on something. Equally, when an academic staff realize that there's other people can find ways to do things which are better than they perhaps might think of doing there, or which are different to, and creates room for argument about what will work and why will it work. I think one of the real difficulties in higher education, as it has had to become more structured, because money is tighter and because consistency of approach is one of the ways you can do things more cheaply at scale, is that the scope for experimenting with new ways of running a course or a module, or new ways of teaching students, that is perhaps diminishing. And that's one of the ways where professional services and academics can work together to really add value. I do think universities could do well by deliberately keeping a space, whether it's knowing that once a year will be permission for a wacky experiment to try and do something, because you can really change the dial on that quite a lot. So yeah, working with academics, really, really important. It keeps you alive and keeps you interested, because you realize that there's people who know a great deal about something and have a perspective on something. And people go into academic careers because they're passionate about the discipline. They're passionate about that way of looking at the world, that way of understanding the world, that way of being a person and being a human in the world. And that can be really, really interesting just to sit alongside and and kind of, sit with and observe and be part of, even in some vague way.
We've covered a huge range of topics today, and finishing up, I'm interested to know what remains your motivation for working in higher education?
Let me say something a little bit pretentious, but this is also something which has stayed as a constant in my career, I think, all the way from the start. And I do think that higher education is a noble endeavour, which sounds a little bit pretentious. I think if you are focusing on educating people to the limits of human knowledge, if you're enabling the creation of new knowledge, you are doing things that try to better the world, as broadly understood. And that is a good thing to do. It's also the case that higher education doesn't deliberately set out to do bad stuff. Yes, bad stuff does happen, but no one's trying to do bad stuff, which they are in some sectors. So that's good reason to be there. And I also think on a personal basis, I have had a very interesting and rewarding career working in universities, working more broadly in the sector, working with so many interesting and clever people, not just academics, but people in professional service roles. And I think it's important to keep that going and keep giving back to it. And that's what keeps me going in this one. And as long as I keep enjoying it, and as long as people keep welcoming me to come and do stuff, I shall be there.
Hugh, thank you so much for your time today and for being my guest in the 50th episode.
Well, thank you very much, Susanna, and happy birthday, Job Shadowing HE.
The Association of Higher Education Professionals and the British University's Finance Directors Group, BUFDOG, are both proud to support Job Shadowing HE as a valuable source of professional insight. The podcast was presented by Susanna Marsden, and you can find out more about her consultancy work at susannamarsden.co.uk. Audio production and music was by me, Rodri Marsden. Find out more about this podcast and hear previous episodes at jobshadowinghe.com.